a lot of the stories that you hear from equipment managers is these experiences, right? Where, they don't get along with their boss and no one cares about what they do. And, does anybody really know how they impact the property? And so my opinion is that they need to feel and know how important that they are to the overall product, and that the success of a golf course superintendent comes also with the success of that equipment manager. If that guy isn't successful, you're not going to.
Welcome to Leadership on the Links, the podcast that showcases innovators in golf course management and the issues they face. I'm your host, Tyler Bloom. In Leadership on the Links, you hear the stories of people shaping the industry from their first swing to their dream match. You'll feel like you're on the course playing with your most inspiring colleagues, having great conversations, digging into insights and sharing a few laughs. Our industry is changing. As a leader, you need to keep up on everything from trends to technology to best practices. Together, we'll continue to build world-class clubs and teams. Let's get to it. Enjoy.
All right, Stephen. Well, I appreciate you joining the podcast here today. It's long overdue. Stephen Tucker is joining in, and really appreciate you taking some time. And I always love to kick this off by asking a little bit tell us about yourself and kind of explain your career journey.
Yeah, I think biggest thing was just loved golf from a young age. I played on the high school golf team. So I was fairly competitive in that aspect. And then I had a friend of mine that went to school at Lake City Community College, and he decided he wanted to go to school to be a golf course superintendent. And in those days, I was just looking to play golf. I just wanted to be on the golf course. So I ultimately ended up going to Lake City as well. And actually, it's weird. Here at Sawgrass is probably the second golf course I ever worked at. Even before I went to college, I learned how to walk mow greens here, and now I'm kind of returning to it. But no, big picture. I was very good with my hands and working with stuff and picking up things, and so I went to Lake City, and I think our goal was that he was going to be a golf course superintendent. I was going to be an equipment manager, and we'd run our own golf course at some point together. And I think he graduated and then went back to college to be a youth pastor, and now he's a pastor in Tampa. So he actually never used his golf course degree. And so I just kept going with it. And ultimately, I guess from my standpoint, tried to figure out I think I was 21 years old, 2021, and trying to figure out where this path was going to take me.
It's interesting. We do a ton of equipment manager searches and have really enjoyed that work over the last few years. And I always find that usually people's entrance into this industry, actually even across whether it's equipment managers, assistants, superintendents, a lot of times it happens by happenstance. Sometimes it's not very intentional or directional. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit from your perspective, networking with equipment managers, how people typically find their way into this industry. And do you see it similar to your path?
No, probably not. I think I took a little bit different path in the terms of just coming from a player side of the coin. I think a lot of equipment managers that are in the business either worked on automotive side or maybe in marine side. There's a lot of old boat technicians and things like the marine industry. And then I think you've also got some military. So I think you've got a combination of those types of people that are in the business, and everybody kind of has a unique route. And most of it all ends with, I saw an ad, and so I wanted to go check it out and see what it was, or somebody had a friend and they heard about an opening and had no idea what this even was, and then ended up liking it. So I wouldn't say that there's any one way that I've seen guys coming into the business. Obviously Lake City, I would say in the 90s, 2000s was putting out technicians and had been doing it slowly since the 70s. And then I know Walla Walla Community College, there's a couple of others that started their technician programs. And then I think over the last, I would say maybe, probably a few years before COVID, all of them seemed to phase out because they couldn't get students. So I think that avenue's kind of dried up a little bit from what it once was.
Well, and I often find talking with different distributors and manufacturers, there's more of an emphasis now on trying to create some of that manufacturer type training, whether it's grinders, mowers, GPS, technology, things of that. I feel like the industry as a whole has done a pretty good job of offering those education pathways, even though maybe it's not like centralized or universal, right? But
Right.
in specific markets, there's that kind of training. And just kind of curious your thoughts about how does the industry solve this? And I know the GCSA is doing a good job with the EM program. But how do you see this like evolving, and how does the industry get on top of this?
Well, I mean, I guess I have more of a unique look at it because I saw this a long time ago, and I know I posted on this on one of your LinkedIn posts. And with doing the IGCMA work many years ago now, we kind of got an inside look that this was going to be happening. Just looking at the age of our membership and knowing that look, there's not enough people filling these voids when people leave. And I guess in that time there wasn't a lot of assistant technicians. There was mainly an equipment manager that was at the golf course, and that was it. So nobody really had any backup plans if that person left. And so I think on the education front, I think GCSA is doing a great job of keeping everybody that's current an equipment manager and providing that at the golf industry show. I think it's wonderful to see. And I think 10 years ago we were at a spot where we were looking for that. Where can we get that education at? I think manufacturer wise, I've, at least in Florida, seen that taper off a little bit. I think once COVID hit, that stretched everybody a little bit. And now with all the orders everybody's getting, I don't know if that's the reason. They're just overly busy and don't have the time to dedicate, but I don't see it as often. Now, I will say, a couple of years ago, the equipment manager that I had at Four Seasons, I encouraged him to go out and to create something in Orlando. And he ended up putting a seminar together, and we reached out to one of the manufacturers, and they came back and supported it. So I don't think it's not there, and I don't think they won't support it, but I think, it's more of us putting it together than it is them putting it together. I remember going to, Toro schools and club car schools and, John Deere and all Bernhardt. I mean, all of these guys were doing education seminars, and some still do, but I just don't see that it's as prevalent as it was. It just seems to have slowed down.
I I had a recent conversation with a number of different superintendents about education and how it's being delivered, and what they're looking for from an education standpoint. And it feels like there's kind of a mix between sort of a digital offering that they can go online, but also still in the field practical experience. I feel specifically for my perspective from the equipment manager side, it's a lot more hands-on in the field type training and education is needed. And I love seeing what I've seen at the GCSA was they have more of these workshops in field at the shop kind of workshops. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I definitely think the hands-on is going to mean a lot. I think that's why it's so tough to do online programs and stuff for colleges to do online training, because technicians, even the ones that we're training right now that just came out of college, they need to do it, and even if I do it and they see it, they just still don't pick it up. They need to physically do it. You got to kind of walk them through it, so that they can kind of get it and be repetitive with it and then be able to duplicate it. So it's tough learning environment to try to do things, online and more digital. But I also think from a technology aspect, things are about to change rapidly. We'll talk more later about AI and that kind of stuff, but from autonomous mowers to all the new electronic, from ECUs and computer systems and all of that, everything is getting much more digital and much more connected. And that requires another level of knowledge. I used to say when we started IGCMA that we were asking equipment managers to be welders, electricians, good at hydraulics, good at cutting units. So you can name off these 4 or 5 things that we were asking one person to be a specialist in, and now we just keep stacking it. Right? We're adding. Okay, we need to have technicians, so we need a leader. So that person needs to not only be able to do all the 5 things I just mentioned, but they also need to be able to lead a team. And then on top of that, now they need to be good with a computer. And then we're going to need to be able to troubleshoot some of those systems. So you know I think that we keep stacking more and more and more and expecting more and more and more. And therefore, you're seeing more pay. But I think you're also seeing less people because not everybody's great at all of those things. I mean, I'm not great at all of those things. So I think that's the challenge. You're wanting all of these things out of someone, and it makes it very difficult. And when you can't deliver, how is that received? And then what are you getting back when you can't deliver on whatever it is that task might be or whatever someone's asking of you? Not only are you going to be disappointed as the equipment manager, but obviously your boss and everyone else is going to be disappointed because you can't get to that level. So, you know, I don't know. I think it's just getting more and more technical, more and more challenging. And the guys that are already in the business have a leg up because they can just try to slowly add it to what they're already doing. But when you're trying to bring someone that's never been in this business at all up and you see all the different things that they need to be good at, it can be a daunting thing to be looking at as a young person trying to be an equipment manager.
So you talk about pay, and that's always it's a central conversation in many of our conversations on pay.
Yep.
And part of that is because I think the role has evolved over time and the expectations no different than this. And I think you've been able to wear the hat of both like director
Yep.
of Crowds Landscape as well as equipment manager. So you've seen both sides of the fence.
Yep.
Talk to me and talk to our audience a little bit of how you've seen the position evolve and where do you see it's heading in the next 10 years that kind of equates to why that compensation has elevated.
Well, I think, some of it is what the requirements are. I mean, I don't know that we ask less of everybody. It's always more. Every year we want to get better. You know, every year, from the director of agronomy side of things, you're having meetings with the members and you're talking to a club, leaders, and everybody wants it better than they had it last year. That comes with expectations, and those expectations drift down to everybody else on your team, right? So if you're a superintendent, it goes to your assistant, it goes to the team, it goes to the equipment managers, and that you just keep building. So every year, and I was at Four Seasons for 10 years. Every year you keep stacking and stacking and stacking. At what point do people feel overwhelmed? And so I think when you look at that, I think if we're going to ask more from people, then we need to be paying them more. Um, I've seen this job go from a $25,000-$30,000 a year job to now, people making over $200,000 a year as an equipment manager. And I think in some ways it's worth it. Look at all the things that you're asking. Now, do I think from a business standpoint that it's sustainable over the long term? When you look at all the business models in golf, I think golf is making more money, but everybody's charging more money. We're paying what? Double what we paid for equipment in 2019. That doesn't just happen. And so even though golf courses are making more money, they're having to spend a lot more money. And dues don't increase by 50%. It's a 3% here, it's a 4% there. So clubs a lot of their deals with the membership, you can't just jack the price up and try to compensate. You have to do it slowly over time. And so I think some of those things get a little bit off. I feel like one of the big things that I try to do is build a team and make it realistic. I mean, we had 4 equipment technicians at Four Seasons, and we were an 18-hole golf course. We kept equipment for 10 years. And so, when I'm trying to sell that and you look at the cost of equipment, Would you really put one person in charge of 200 cars and ask them to change the oil, grind the reels, do all those things? Like the numbers don't add up. You don't have enough time in the day to take care of equipment to the level that you would need to in order to keep the equipment for longer to help the club be profitable. So the justification of that is, okay, well, we need to add more technicians to meet what the standard is for the club. If the club wants to be a great club, then we need to make sure that we get more eyes on that equipment, because at the end of the day, as a superintendent, I think John Patterson said it in one of his videos, we're at the end of the day, the superintendent is providing the canvas and we're painting the picture, right? So how good does that picture need to be? And how do you put a number on that? So I think as a club, you have to decide, what's more important and where are you going to put your money? And I think if we're trying to keep equipment longer, it's going to be adding more technicians. And I think that's a smart decision for any, course operator to make, because it creates a succession plan of guys being able to step up into that role. And now you're not searching every time you lose somebody. I'm sure, you do your consulting, I do mine. And at the end of the day, we can't fill equipment manager positions because there's not enough people out there, and people can keep paying. But, if somebody's happy with where they are and they're making a good wage, they're not looking to leave. And, I think there's so many question marks out there, different types of managers, that when a technician finds a good place, whether he makes more somewhere else or not, he's not willing to leave it because he's at a spot that somebody cares about him as an individual, but also his development. And I think technicians are seeing a lot more value in that than they used to a while ago.
It's interesting you talk about the recruitment of technicians and where are we going to pull those people from. I mean, I still subscribe to most likely they're coming from the team. If you're in need of an assistant equipment technician, and maybe you can give better substance to this than I can. This is just more of an observation, and is my own practical experience, is that typically the equipment manager, there's somebody on that team or a handful of people that they trust enough, because that person respects their position. They respect cleaning the equipment. They expect organizing and keeping the shop clean, that they typically can go to them and say, hey, here's somebody I'd like to bring into the shop more, because they seem to be somewhat engaged. Like I always say, that's kind of how I would determine finding an assistant equipment tech versus trying to recruit that from the outside, which sometimes, listen, we've had great success finding people from other industries, automotive, whatever the case may be, different mechanical background. Those people typically do well, but oftentimes I just think because of the cultural perspective of understanding clubs and the workflow of clubs, that people on the team actually might be a good resource for that. What are you saying?
I would say that I would answer that differently depending on what role I was in.
Hmm.
If I look at it from a superintendent needing a technician, I'm willing to do whatever I got to do to put someone in that spot. It is a little bit unique because I can do both of those. And so I didn't feel as much pressure if I was down someone, because I could just jump in and do it. But, I think a lot of times, people get backed into a corner and they have to make a decision, and it isn't always in the best interest of the club in general, because if you think about it, if you bought I don't know, $120,000 car, would you just grab somebody off the street that knew how to somewhat turn a wrench and let them work on it? It's, on one hand, you're trying to fill a void and you're trying to give someone an opportunity, right, to step up. But you're not giving them all the training that they need to be successful most of the time, and not quick enough for sure. And so most of the time, the advice I've been giving is I would go back to the club and try to get more money to keep the guy that you have, if you're happy with that guy, than I would to let him go and try to find somebody else. I think at the end of the day, when you look at what you're paying that individual and what the value or cost of equipment is, most of the time it's way skewed. And so, as a club, you got to make an important decision as you see these salaries and stuff increases. What's the value of that? If you're leasing equipment and you're flipping equipment every few years and you can afford to do that, then you're changing oil and you're grinding reels. You're not doing rebuilds. You're not, doing some of the bigger and more, I guess more technical repairs. But if you're doing those technical repairs, grabbing a guy off the street and throwing him in there, he will eventually figure it out. But to what extent and what value to the club? How much is it going to cost the club to be able to get that guy where he needs to be, and how long can you wait? So I think I think for me that's a big factor, and I think the other side of this is something that just we never do. We know it exists, we know it's a problem, but we just don't do it, and that is career awareness.
Mm.
People knowing that this job exists and what it pays. If you went out on the street and you told people what this job could pay, how many, you tell me people would just walk away from that? They're going to go spend, $100,000 to go to college and make less money as somebody that you could just pull off the crew and put them in working on equipment. It's a big problem that we have not explaining what this job really is. I recently, I picked up pretty much half of my team from a local college that, they had diesel mechanics and they had, ASE certifications and stuff like that. And I went to one of their career fairs and I put up, me and one of the assistants on the team. He was looking for superintendents or assistant superintendents, and so, people would eventually wander up because you were sitting there and they saw our logo and everybody kind of knew what that was and said, well, what kind of mechanical stuff do you have? And I started explaining it. And then I went into what you could make in this business in, really a relatively short amount of time in retrospect to every other career. And they were just blown away. I didn't even know that this was even a thing. I thought it was just lawnmowers and guys were out there pushing them. And so, if we could figure out, and I said this years ago, the motorcycle colleges used to always put these ads up on TV of this motorcycle school in Orlando, and it had a pretty big, I'd say all around Florida, or NASCAR probably in Charlotte and areas like that probably did some school or some TV ads and stuff like that, and they'd run them around soap opera times during 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, because people are at home trying to figure out what they're going to do at that time. If you're sitting at home at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're probably looking for a job, or you've just had it great and you're retired, or whatever the case may be. So, I feel like if we could show kids what this could be, that they didn't have to go to college for 4 years to make a good wage, that there is excitement to this position and what it does, and that there's a cause and effect. You fix it and then you get to see it. And in some cases, if you're lucky, you get to see it on television with another million people. So, I think from my standpoint, we've got to do as an industry a lot better job of explaining what this job is. And I think if we did that well, I think you would get a good response. I just don't see a reason why you wouldn't get a good response.
You'll enjoy this. This was 2 years ago. We did a national study. I hired an independent research company to do a national study on working Americans, right? This wasn't from the golf industry. This is, based off the US Census, of working Americans. And that really ranged from people ages 18, I think, to 65. And they could be everything from your first line entry level staff all the way to like a COO executive, right? And we asked there was 3 sort of key themes that we were focused on. One is, what do people think about the career in golf? Would they even consider it a career? The second was more about retention focus. What keeps people employed, or what keeps them staying at a facility? And then I think the third area was, recruit, her best methods, her best practices. But the question around, would you consider a career in golf? Overwhelming response. It was like 80 to 90% of people didn't even know that there were careers in golf and where this golf course was, right? So to your point, just in general, career awareness is an ongoing thing that's not just industry, that's individual facility, individual department really taking that effort and initiative, which it's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So to educate people, and sometimes it's the long game. It's not an immediate. You go out to a career fair, you host high school students, that automatically you get dozens of candidates coming through. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting perspective. So I really appreciate that you said that.
Yeah. I think too, like even the club, I made it a point to introduce our equipment manager when I was at Four Seasons to our members. During member guests, we would all stand up at the putting green while they were all putting to go out, and I'd have my equipment manager up there because I felt like it's important. If they don't know what he does and how he contributes, then when club decisions get made, no one's going to even know that they need to make a decision based on any of those things. So, you know, I guess for me, being an equipment manager prior to when I got the director's role, I started thinking about what would I have wanted if I were them, if I was an equipment manager and my boss could do anything for me, what would have been the things that I would have wished he would have done? And the biggest thing is you want to know that everybody's aware how you contribute to the overall product, right? That your contribution matters, and the only way of doing that isn't me going back and telling my equipment manager, hey, you did a great job and the golf course looks great and all of that. It's him hearing that from a member, like, a member walking up to him saying, guys, man, these greens are the best they've ever been. To him walking away from that, he's not hearing it from me, he's hearing it from all of them. And that impact to those guys and to anyone really, that's what you want to hear. That makes you want to go back and do it again for next year. It's those small motivators that get people re-energized to do this all over again for another year. And so I think that's another kind of thing that we could do a better job of, is making sure our GM, making sure that, the stakeholders, those members that are on a greens committee or the ones that have the loudest voice are seeing your team and that understand their impact and what they actually do to provide the conditions that they do.
You talked earlier, I think in a couple sentences ago, about kind of what you would do to kind of encourage or promote your equipment manager. From your experience and what you see, what is the best way a superintendent can demonstrate recognition, promotion, a great partnership with their equipment manager? What have you seen? Man, Stephen, I love the fact that you've been on both sides of it. So it's a really interesting perspective.
You know, I can just give you my experience and what I think. I mean, I used to have a weekly meeting with our team, and a lot of guys would say, "Man, how do you have time to do a weekly meeting?" It would take us about an hour. Equipment manager there, our secretary, our assistants, second assistants, they would be in the room, and I would go around the room and let everybody kind of have their voice on what things that we needed to do to get better. So the equipment manager could say, look, could you guys, if you're going to top dress, could you let me know a week in advance? Is that possible? So that way we're not putting reels out that have just been ground. So the one thing about those meetings is you can't just complain. You have to give a reason why and a solution. Like, we'll go around the room and you can say whatever you want to say, but come with a solution and come with how we're going to solve the problem. And you get everybody invested in going in the same direction and not, pockets of people. As an equipment manager, you think about it, you got 4 or 5 different people that are coming to you every day wanting something that's the most important thing to them. Right. And so now you get to decide which one's more important, because which one am I going to work on? I can't fix all 5 of them. And so I think as an equipment manager, you just want to feel that you're not on this boat alone, that you've got a whole team of people that are trying to make your job easier, not try to make it harder. It's already hard enough with having people stack things on top of it. And I think in the past and in the beginning of my career, there were a lot of times where people would just drop this information off. We need a tractor set up. We need this aerifier done. We need all these things done, and then just walk away. It's almost like just throw a grenade in and walk away from it and just see what happens. And I think a lot of the stories that you hear from equipment managers is these experiences, right? Where, they don't get along with their boss and no one cares about what they do. And, does anybody really know how they impact the property? And so my opinion is that they need to feel and know how important that they are to the overall product, and that the success of a golf course superintendent comes also with the success of that equipment manager. If that guy isn't successful, you're not going to be. because if you could grow the healthiest turf in the world, and if that guy doesn't have it cut well, it doesn't matter because that's what people see, right? So at the end of the day, you need to invest as much into the people around you as you are in your own career, because it's them that when you start sitting in that seat, you start realizing that it's really all about them and it's a lot less about you, because they got to be the ones that go get the job done. They're the ones that are out there making the decision on whether they're going to send that mower out again, even though it doesn't cut well, or that they're going to take the extra time to make sure it cuts well when they send it out. And you're not going to get the buy-in from that team if they don't feel like they're part of that. If they don't feel like they're the contributor and they're the ones that are helping make that success, then you're not going to be a success, because you're going to be fighting that all the time. And I think that's all equipment managers want, to be honest. I mean, pay or not, if they need more pay, they'll find another place to work. That's that is what it is. And I think that's taking care of itself now, much less than it was a problem before. Yeah. I think now it's more of a matter of just treat me like I should be treated. I mean, that's the golden rule, right? And I think if you do that and you treat them like your career is dependent on them to be successful, and you give them the tools for that success, then I think the sky's the limit for whoever it is. I said, but if you're not willing to do that and you think you know more than everybody else does, and you run everything with an iron fist, you get what you give. You're not going to have a guy that's pulling on the same end of the rope with you.
Clearly you've had some pretty good mentors or influences across your career and good experiences. Talk a little bit about that. Who's been the biggest influence to you? And maybe it's not one person, maybe it's multiple.
I think from a mentoring standpoint, I think I spend a lot of time looking at and paying attention to what other people do and where their successes are. I think, I I always have quite a few guys that I like for different reasons. Some of it's because, I'm similar, have a similar personality to others, and I would put like Thomas Bastis, and I would put John Cunningham and Carlos Urrea in that group of people. Bruce Williams, from a consulting standpoint, I reached out to him early in my career to talk about what the do's and don'ts are and how I should do it. And he really helped me a lot to understand the business in that sense. Does consulting more places than I could ever dream of going. And if anybody would know what was success look like, it would be him. I've been very fortunate to have been able to travel around the world and meet people that I never would have had an opportunity to meet. And as an equipment manager, it's, there's not a whole lot of people that get the opportunity to say that. And then to be on both sides of it, more unique experiences that guys, maybe haven't gotten an inside look at. I think some of it too is learning yourself, and understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are, and being okay with people telling you what that is, how they see it, or how they see you leading, and what mistakes you're making, and you being willing to change who you are, for each individual type of person. I would say from my standpoint, understanding the things that were important to people, were the keys to my success. And I tell my guys, and have over the last probably 10 years, that as you move up, I think you realize that it becomes less about you and more about everybody else. And the sooner that you figure that out, I think the quicker then your success becomes, because you're investing in all those people that end up making you successful in the end. Those people are able to be good at what they do because you invested the time and effort into them. You listened to what they asked. You let them run with a thing that you thought was nuts to begin with, but you wanted to see them fail so that they could learn from that specific event. I think 4 seasons in Ritz-Carlton, I spent 18 years, or no, 20 years probably, between those two hotel companies. I think the leadership that you learn how to be a leader, you get to see it in full effect, when it works and when it doesn't work in other departments and in other ways. And I think you learn how to take the goods from all those experiences and put them into your own management style. You know, coming up in the business, I saw the things I hated and vowed that I'd never be that person and do those things. And I saw the things that really worked well and that people responded to. And I was okay with, you know, evolving them. I'm not the type of person that says, okay, this is what he's doing, so now I'm going to do it. I was the type of person that said, look what he's doing. How do I elevate what he's doing and then make it my own? And so my whole, you know, from leadership to learning how to run an association to, you know, to being an equipment manager, being a director of agronomy, and now back at doing that again, you know, I've had a lot of opportunity to meet a lot of great people, and they all have had flaws and all have had things where I said, yeah, you know, I don't know if I would do it that way, and be okay with saying that to them, and explaining to them why. And those I think are the friends that you kind of get in the golf business and anywhere else. I mean, I'm teaching my kids that now is, you know, in life, you're going to have a handful of people that you can actually count on, and you need to make sure you know who those people are, and you need to invest as much into them as they invest into you. And I think at the end of the day, it makes you a better person. And I think the better person that you are, the better leader you end up becoming. And I think people respond to that. And so, you know, I think from my standpoint, those are, I would say, there's no like one name, I guess, that's been a mentor. I would say everybody I've come in contact in some way or another has been a mentor, either on the positive side or on the negative side, because I've learned something from a lot of people. So.
Well, that was awesome. I really appreciate that. One of the things I can tell has been influential to you is technology. And
Yeah.
I want to spend the last couple minutes here just highlighting program that you developed. I'm very interested because I'm an AI guy. We have been working on some really fun stuff with AI, different sort of focus in what we're doing, but I always love seeing people that are leveraging AI in some capacity. So I want to give you the floor for the last little bit here.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in some ways, give you a little bit of context of where this kind of comes from. You know, when I was running the IGCMA years ago, I was also running an online gaming business, video gaming business, and I traveled to Korea and took a handful of people from the United States to compete against all the other countries in Korea. And so I built this gaming league, and in some ways I tried to do that initially just for the fun of it and see if it could become a business. But then I started realizing how far golf was behind in technology. You know, when you start looking at those businesses and you start figuring out, well, how does that cross over into golf? How can I use some of the things that we're doing in gaming and affect golf? And I don't know if you'll remember this, but you know, back when IGCMA was going, we came out with the first virtual trade show that was online, and this was years and years before COVID. And I saw it in the gaming business and they were in Intel and all these companies were doing it, and so we brought it into the golf business, and it never really, I think, fully took off because you know you lose that personal touch being at the golf show. Um, but you still, from a vendor standpoint, they can still reach a big target audience. So anyway, long story short, I always have been on the leading edge of technology, and so I always felt like the website ought to change more often because people get to come into it and then you know they see it and then they don't like it because it's the same old thing and they're not getting anything new when they come. And so with IGCMA, we would change it more often because we'd want people to come and look at the new thing. Um, so with this, you know, I've been in the golf business for a long time. I have all these things in my head that I would love to be able to transform and do. And the equipment management role is a difficult one to begin with, but trying to quantify what everything is, and then, you know, to make it all make sense and for you to know, you know, where your money's going, when does equipment need to be replaced. But how do you do that efficiently? You know, for for many years, trims was the big program to use, and then you know you had a couple more programs that would come out here and there, but the people doing the work never did the development. So you know you had stuff that you had to conform your operation to in order to run these programs. And so, you know, I decided, especially when AI, I mean, I have enough web development knowledge to be able to understand way things need to be built. And then all I needed was hints on some of these things to develop and how to develop them. And so obviously with AI coming out, you've got that push and that connection that I can just ask it what I want and get it to work. And so I started planning this thing out. And initially it was like, look, it'd be great if I could take my consulting platform, meaning my Excel spreadsheet that I use to be able to determine when equipment should be replaced. If I could digitalize that some way so that it'd be more helpful to other golf courses that I don't visit. And so I kind of started down that road with it. And then it was like, well, but I need all the preventative maintenance stuff and all the records in order for this to really tell you the right numbers and the ROI and all of that. I need that information. So then I built the platform out a little bit more. And then, then I got this position as a director, and I'm like, well, look, everybody's been using these job boards, but I've got a subscription for this and I got a subscription for that. And there's 17 different monthly fees that we got to pay for, whether it's the moisture meter or the job board or the PM system or all these different things. Wouldn't it be great if all this was just kind of doing everything together? And so then I started building the job board, and as I built the job board, I started realizing, well, it'd be great if we actually knew how much each task costs. Like if we're raking bunkers, how much money a year do we spend on bunkers? Because if I sit in a budget meeting and they want to cut a cost by 10%, I need to know where that money's coming from so that there's a cause and effect to the reduction. Like you go out there and you see the bunkers aren't raked. Well, this was your decision. You wanted to not spend this extra 10%. I've always tried to tag something to it if we're going to make a reduction. So anyway, I just started building this out further and further and further. And so now it's to the point to where like, I can't live without it. I mean, the numbers that I see, everything's in front of us. I mean, I've got a digital job board where the whole team can see it. You've got iPads where guys are entering in their data. So I'm not sitting there all day entering in work orders. It's all just flowing, right? So the one big thing about any software, and I've been lucky to have some people that were members that I had relationships with to ask them some of these questions, and one of the big keys that one of the guys told me was, look, if you can't get to the information that you need to within 2 clicks, then you're going to lose everybody. And so building this out, I was thinking, okay, so I need to figure out how do I make this seamless? And, you click here, you get there. And then, and so I started working through all of those different things, and I bet I rewrote this thing 3 times, completely. I mean, just wrote it to a point, and then it was like, no, I got to start this over. And so now I'm at the point to where, and this is going to be more and more of an issue for some companies that have put a lot of money into trying to develop software. AI is great, but AI, number one, you need to understand how it works. Number two, they're still working on how to get it to do everything without giving you false information or it going down the wrong path or whatever the case may be. So, building some of these systems, and, when I start talking about specifics like RAG systems and being able to create these databases where the AI is only searching your information and not searching what's online and giving you kind of random info off somebody's website, that's part of it. In the golf business, we need to be able to contain all that information and then only use our info and not let that outside influence AI. So now you're building these pockets of AI where, you only want it to read from certain information. Well, then you've got all these different versions of it. You've got Grok and you've got, Claude, and you've got, all of these different systems, and which one's going to win? I mean, they can't all thrive. There's not enough power for them all to do everything that they're wanting to do. So you're going to have some winners and you're going to have some losers. And so you just want to make sure you pick the right one, I guess, if you're developing it.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that I've had to understand is that also there's new policies on AI. So if you build a platform and let's say those whatever companies you're trying to sell this to only want to use a certain AI, Well, what if your AI is built out of, you're using the wrong one? They won't accept it. So now you're limiting who you can sell that software to because you're using an AI different than what's mandated or whatever by certain companies. So, so now I've developed the platform to be able to accept any AI. So if you're a company that, you only use Grok, then you could select Grok as the AI to use, and now everything just runs on it. Or, hey, you may have your own AI system and you just want to bring a key and plug the key in, and now it's running on your own system. You can do that too. But if you're not thinking of all of these things when you're developing this stuff, you're going to get yourself into a spot where you built this great platform that only 3 or 4 people can use because there's too many policies that are getting figured out and built around it. So yeah, I mean, it's my evening work, where I'm seeing what we did today and coming in here and figuring out how I need to change it, or I see somebody struggling with something and okay, well, I need to come back and edit this or change that. And I think at the end of the day, part of this is just the data too. Like, um, the bigger companies obviously have some parameters around the data that they collect. And just like surveys or anything else, I think the big thing about building softwares that can be very powerful with this data is knowing what to do with it and how to use it and where it makes sense and where it doesn't. And I think that's one of the things that I'm working to figure out now is, you know, if I could put in a part that, let's just say an alternator on a 2653 and it failed, and at 250 hours I put on a new one, and then 300 hours later it fails again, and then 15 other people's alternators failed. Well, now the system itself is telling me at how many hours those parts are going to fail. So now I've got a predictive system that tells me what I need to order because it's going to fail soon, and not one where I've got to stockpile a whole bunch of parts in my parts room because I'm waiting on something that may or may not happen. And then it never happens. And I end up with a whole bunch of parts that I can't get rid of because I no longer have those machines. So this is the thoughts that I'm having, is not like this first iteration of, okay, it's great, it's a system and it can give you your information quickly. It's what's the next step beyond that, where I can see where the machine is, that codes are coming in. Right now I'm connected to John Deere's operations center, and I can pull the codes off of the machines. So when an error code comes off of a machine, it shows up on our dashboard inside the office, and we can go and we can take care of it right now. So everything becomes a lot less reactive, and we can run the operation much more efficiently and know what's happening and when it's happening. And I think for right now, for me, I'm kind of in those stages where I'm still testing, and I can't keep myself from building the next thing and the next thing and the next thing onto it. It's hard. It's hard for that. This last thing that I'll talk about is just I'm building an app for cutting unit management. So bed knife thickness, reel diameter, what angles you should grind at, when should reels be changed out. You're going to scout, but at what height and at what clearance, and the app be able to help guide you through when you're setting up your cutting units, what they need to be set up to. And that being all data from each golf course. So my golf course is going to be different. I'm going to need different clearance than somebody else is going to need. And wouldn't it be great just to know that and not have to relive it every year? Once those parameters got hit, wouldn't it be nice for something to pop up and say, all right, you need to change these reels out because you're not going to be able to get to the heights of cut that you want to get to this season if you don't. And so that's where this is at right now. And it does all these things right now. And now it's just a matter of really testing it and just making sure that I don't have any issues anywhere. But I think that for me, that's fun because I'm taking what's in my mind and saying, well, why don't they do this? And why would you build this program and not do these things? And now I can just do it. And it's fun. It's fun to see it actually work, and to let somebody use it, and then their eyes to just be like, man, where has this been my whole career? So
Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to seeing more about this, learning more, and maybe I'll even pilot it with you and
Yeah.
just give it a view. We are very much interested in AI and what it can do for clubs and operations, efficiencies, all that kind of stuff, budgeting, communication. So, um, Stephen, this was awesome. We will have to do this again because
Yeah.
we could just talk one full conversation on AI.
Yes.
So kudos to you, man. Like, first off, just as somebody who pays attention to people's career pathways, things that they're doing, man, like really impressive. A lot to be proud of. And certainly I think for equipment managers that have gotten to know you to speak volumes about you, and other superintendents speak volumes about you. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
No, I appreciate it. And, I think my whole career has been about just trying to continue to advance this profession. And it's been great to be able to have been on both sides of it and see it from every side and every angle, and to be on and be able to talk to you guys, and have a lot of great friends out there, and this business has afforded me that opportunity. So,
Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
well, that's everywhere. I think so. Obviously, Turf Addict is my company site, so I have that, and guys can get me at Steven at turfaddict.com. Twitter is Steven Tucker 7. And then my just personal email is tmflorida@gmail.com. And then outside of that, I'm traveling, so on occasion you may see me around or see me in the area. So.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Leadership on the Links. For more leadership insights and industry expertise, connect with us at bloomgolfpartners.com or follow us on social media sites LinkedIn and Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode of Leadership on the Links, we'd be thrilled if you'd leave a review or share it with someone who you know would get some value. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to stay updated. Thanks for joining us today.